"They're watching," Traore murmured. Colonel Sekou, head of intelligence, nodded grimly. 3 separate surveillance aircraft in 48 hours. No transponder signals, possibly American, but they're masked. Traore stood up, pacing. The French left. NATO's gone, but the sky, they think it still belongs to them. Burkina Faso had been changing course rapidly. Under Traore's leadership, the nation severed ties with traditional Western partners and charted a new path, one that embraced self-determination, regional solidarity, and new allies in the East. This new alignment had made enemies. Traore knew that. What he didn't know was how close they had already come. By noon, a sandstorm rolled in from the Sahel, turning the sky above Ouagadougou to a dull orange haze. It blanketed the streets and brought traffic to a standstill. But inside the presidential compound, movement intensified. Reports arrived from border stations, unidentified aerial vehicles sighted in tandem, flying low, then disappearing into cloud cover. No country claimed them. No nation acknowledged them. That afternoon, a coded message arrived through an old Soviet-era channel, still active through Burkina Faso's foreign intelligence network. The message bore one phrase, buried in garbled static. "Prepare for strategic disruption. Midnight operation probable. High-value target marked." The target could only mean one man. President Traore stared at the decoded strip of paper, then glanced at the clock. 6 hours to midnight. Elsewhere in the capital, embassies flickered with activity. The American compound dimmed its exterior lights. A private military contractor with ties to a European state evacuated its personnel under the guise of a fuel leak, but the people of Ouagadougou remained unaware. To them, it was just another stormy evening in the dry season. Traore convened a silent meeting with only 3 of his most trusted: Colonel Sekou, Chief of Defense Adama Traoré, and a special liaison known only as Red Fox, a Russian security advisor embedded in Burkina Faso for barely 6 weeks. "I don't want to believe it's a strike," Traoré said, voice tight. "But the pattern is there. It's what they did before Gaddafi, before Sankara." Red Fox, who rarely spoke, broke his silence. "We can scramble contingency aircraft, but if it's American F-35s, they will not be seen until it's too late. Our radar signatures are weak." Traore's jaw clenched. "We will not run, but I won't let them erase me like a name in sand." He turned to Sekou. "Send the Raven call." Sekou hesitated, then unlocked a secured laptop and typed a phrase into a line of code. The message shot across a subterranean network, bouncing from servers in Bamako to Minsk, then to an undisclosed base somewhere in equatorial Africa. The message was brief. Falcon marked. Bear responds. Back on the rooftop of the presidential compound, guards adjusted thermal scopes and scanned the darkening skies. Wind howled across antennas. Lights dimmed. And above the Sahel at 40,000 feet, a formation of unmarked aircraft slowed to a holding pattern. The storm, as silent as it was, had arrived. At precisely 02:43 a.m., the skies over Burkina Faso darkened in ways no sandstorm could explain. Military-grade jammers, strategically activated along a northern arc, cut power grids and disrupted communications across Ouagadougou. Whole districts were plunged into a surreal, flickering blackout. Streetlights blinked out. Cellular towers went mute. The only thing that moved freely now was fear. Inside the presidential compound, emergency generators whirred to life. Red lights bathed the corridors. Soldiers moved in silence, weapons drawn, every step echoing like a countdown. President Traore stood in the secondary command bunker, staring at the massive display screen where radar signatures danced erratically. "They're almost within range," Red Fox said, voice low. 4 inbound fighters, supersonic, no transponders, origin points scrambled. "American?" Traore asked. "Almost certainly, carrier-based. They've come too far too fast to be regional." Colonel Sekou cursed under his breath. "We won't see them, not on this equipment. They'll be overhead before we hear the sound, but not all systems were blind. From a decommissioned weather station deep in the Gurma region, a signal pulsed into the ether. It was not Burkina Bay tech, nor African. Its code structure was Cyrillic, its encryption layered in Slavic precision. Within moments, the feed was mirrored in the presidential bunker. Across the map appeared 3 new blips, non-Western high-speed interceptors entering from the southeast, flying low and fast. Red Fox grinned. "Your bear is coming." Thousands of feet above the red earth, while Ouagadougou slept in darkness, 2 worlds collided in silence. The American jets, sleek and predatory, locked onto their phantom target coordinates. Their onboard AI calculated routes, jamming patterns, and strike zones. They had done this before. Syria, Libya, Somalia, but not here, not this time. Because just as the strike team broke into formation, the unthinkable happened. A warning signal flashed across their HUDs. Active lock-on detected. From behind them, 6 aircraft had appeared, stealth Su-57s, long whispered to be stationed somewhere in Africa, but never confirmed. They flanked the American fighters like ghosts, cloaked until the last second. In cockpit after cockpit, American pilots hesitated. Their training screamed at them to respond, but rules of engagement were strict. Firing on Russian aircraft, especially unprovoked, would escalate beyond any operation command could cover. The skies above Ouagadougou became a frozen tableau, 2 apex predators circling, radar warnings blaring, target locks pinging back and forth like lightning. At ground level, Traore watched the feed. "They're bluffing," Traoré said. "The Americans won't retreat unless they think they're already compromised." Traore turned to Red Fox. "Make them think it." With a series of commands, Red Fox activated a dormant Russian satellite feed. A simulated strike formation, a holographic ghost squadron, was projected into the airspace 60 kilometers north of the American jets. To radar, it looked real. It looked massive. The effect was immediate. The American pilots began banking west, one after another. Communications scrambled through encrypted relay, mission abort, false intel, high-risk interference. Within 6 minutes, the F-35s had disengaged and retreated over the border into Mali, then toward the Gulf. Ouagadougou exhaled, but Traore did not. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "This wasn't a warning shot. This was a test." Red Fox nodded. "Next time they won't come from the sky. They'll use someone who bleeds like us." Sekou looked to Traore. "Do we respond?" Traore stared into the map, its lights fading. "No speeches, no retaliation, just the truth. We survived because we saw the shadows before they touched the ground." He stepped out of the command room into the orange glow of the horizon, Ouagadougou slowly waking beneath a foreign peace. The capital was intact, but the game had changed. The early morning silence in Ouagadougou was interrupted by the low, rhythmic thrum of helicopters circling above the palace compound. Though the skies were now clear, the tension remained thick, hanging over the capital like a curtain of static. Few civilians knew how close their world had come to ignition. Fewer still would ever understand the price paid to avoid it. In the underground chamber of the presidential palace, President Ibrahim Traoré sat before a steel table marked with fresh tactical overlays. His hands were clasped tightly. He had not slept. Across from him stood Red Fox, unusually still. On the monitors beside them, a secure transmission crackled to life. The Kremlin's insignia hovered for a brief second before disappearing, replaced by a face. "General Anatoly Baranov." "Falcon," Baranov said, his voice like gravel. "You live." "For now," Traore replied. Baranov's nod was slow, deliberate. "The bear's shadow covered you last night, but it was too close, too fast." "We saw the jet trails from the rooftops," Traore said, leaning forward. "We felt the heat. That wasn't deterrence. That was war with training wheels." Red Fox interjected. "We need guarantees, not guesses. The F-35s came from the carrier USS Liberty. We confirmed it through visual signature comparison and signal origin. They denied involvement, lied without blinking. Baranov's eyes narrowed. So then we give them a reason to blink. A new screen opened beside the call, satellite imagery. In it, a convoy of military vehicles was spotted crossing a narrow strip in Niger, headed toward a known French base recently vacated. Another image showed crates being unloaded, marked in Cyrillic. It wasn't just Burkina Faso anymore. The bear had moved further south. Joint exercises, Baranov said, unmarked, off record. No flags, no speeches, but if they come back, they won't leave with just scratches. Traore studied the images. You've deployed more than air cover. We've deployed memory, Baranov said, so they don't forget Syria or Donbass or Belgrade. Silence settled over the room. Traore stood. We don't want to become someone's battlefield, not west, not east, but we won't be anyone's experiment either. Baranov's tone softened. Then stand strong, but don't stand alone. The transmission ended. Outside the chamber, Colonel Sekou was coordinating a media blackout. No leaks, no premature narratives. The international community remained largely unaware of what had transpired in the last 12 hours. But fragments were already floating. Whispers of Russian planes, foreign interference, even drone footage posted by a teenager in Koudougou showing a glowing triangular formation streaking across the clouds. Inside Burkina Faso's borders, the response was swift but quiet. Checkpoints were reinforced. Strategic communications were rerouted through secured landlines. Traore issued one directive above all: watch those closest. Because Red Fox had been right, the next wave wouldn't come cloaked in metal but in flesh. Advisors, diplomats, contractors, journalists. Traore knew better than to trust any suit that didn't sweat in the Sahel. By dusk, Red Fox reported a new movement. Russian electronic warfare units had established a mobile hub disguised as a mining operation near the border with Ghana. Not a threat, an eye. I'll deny it exists, he said. But if they move again, that eye will blink first. Traore walked out into the courtyard. The call to prayer echoed faintly in the distance. The city, shaken but whole, pulsed with life. A child kicked a can down the road. A fruit vendor wiped dust from his wares. The world had almost changed overnight, but the bear had shown its teeth, and the falcon, for now, still flew. Part 5. The moment before impact. By the time the morning fog lifted over Ouagadougou's skyline, Burkina Faso's airspace was no longer just a patch of sky. It had become a razor-thin boundary between provocation and catastrophe. The failed strike had not ended tensions. It had merely changed their shape. Now, the threat wasn't in the air. It was in the uncertainty. President Ibrahim Traoré sat in a reinforced intelligence chamber, eyes fixed on a black glass table displaying a real-time, multinational battlefield simulation. It wasn't a map of his country. It was a chessboard of global nerves. Movement detected near the Ghana border, Red Fox reported. 5 reconnaissance drones, low altitude, civilian markings, but their path mirrors known reconnaissance flight lines. Traore didn't look away. And in the south? Colonel Sekou responded. French satellite relay stations have gone active again. They've triangulated multiple listening nodes into a tight grid formation. They're not gathering intelligence. They're laying coordinates. Traore tapped the table, meaning if one bullet is fired the wrong way, Red Fox finished the sentence. It'll light the sky. At 12:06 p.m., an alert flashed across the main screen. One of the Russian forward-operating radars, disguised in the mining zone, picked up 6 high-speed objects breaking formation above the Gulf of Guinea. Unknown, but consistent with hypersonic test profiles. Could be bluff, said Red Fox. Could be bait, said Sekou. Could be real, said Traore. The room fell silent. Orders were given. Burkina Faso's modest but highly trained air defense network shifted into activation posture. Mobile batteries were moved into civilian infrastructure, stadiums, reservoirs, and parks, not as shields, but as deterrents. To any eye in the sky, a strike now would mean civilian casualties, and no nation wanted that footage playing on global feeds. In a closed-call meeting, Traore reached out to Algeria, Mali, and Guinea. "This is not just about us," he said. "This is about whether our skies are our own." Guinea pledged to scramble legacy MiGs. Algeria promised radar support. Mali offered to ground its own aircraft to avoid misidentification. Africa, fractured but waking, was beginning to blink in unison. And then it happened. At 2:17 p.m., an American fighter broke formation. It drifted eastward toward the Burkina border, breaching the 200-kilometer red line established by Traore's Defense Council. Alarms shrieked. Defense crews readied launch keys, but before anyone could fire, the screen changed. New blips appeared, 5 Russian Su-57s rising like shadows from behind the Ghanaian horizon. Not charging, not aggressive, just there. One Russian pilot activated an open frequency and spoke into the void. Not another step. The American jet hesitated, then turned back. A full 90 seconds passed before all enemy signatures began retreating. In the bunker, no one moved. No cheers, no adrenaline bursts. Only the shared realization of what almost was. Red Fox whispered, "We were 10 seconds from impact." Traore nodded slowly. "And 1 breath from war." Outside, life went on. Children played in dusty courtyards. Vendors returned to their routines. The city had no idea that its entire history had dangled over a cliff and returned, breathless but intact. Traore walked outside, raised his eyes to the blue sky, and let the sun touch his face. Not as a politician, not as a commander, but as a man who had just walked the blade's edge and come back whole. Part 6. When silence speaks louder than bombs. The news never broke. There were no headlines, no press briefings, no satellite footage analyzed on international television. What nearly sparked a global incident dissolved into shadows before it could catch fire. And yet, in the quiet, everything changed. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of the Ouagadougou military airstrip, his boots coated in the red dust that curled like smoke behind arriving transports. One of the Russian aircraft sat silent nearby, its cockpit empty, its purpose complete. No flags were raised, no cameras allowed. Just nods between men who understood that history had turned in silence. The Su-57s had vanished into the clouds hours after the American jets pulled back. No engagement, no missiles, just presence, enough to speak without a single bullet. The world, for once, had heard. In the following days, embassies grew eerily polite. The American ambassador, pale and smiling too often, paid a surprise visit to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. France issued a statement praising Burkina Faso's commitment to stability. NATO went quiet. And the global press busied itself elsewhere with economic summits and royal weddings. The silence was intentional. The message was clear. Nothing happened here, and it better stay that way. Inside Burkina Faso, however, everything had changed. Traoré convened with leaders from the Sahel Alliance, Niger, Mali, Guinea, and Central African Republic. In a closed-door summit beneath a nondescript concrete hall, they signed the Ouagadougou Accords, an unspoken defense pact, a commitment to mutual sovereignty, unaligned and unafraid. "Security," Traoré said to them, "is not a loan from the West. It is a right born with our borders." Red Fox had already begun his quiet departure. His mission, though never officially acknowledged, had ended with a message scrawled on a slip of paper left in the war room. "Bears don't roar, they watch." Colonel Sekou expanded the Cyber Defense Division. Burkina Faso's tech sector, once an afterthought, became the heartbeat of national defense. Former street hackers were recruited. Encryption became national curriculum. The country had learned its lesson. Sovereignty begins in the sky, but it survives in silence. Traore himself changed too. His speeches grew shorter, his visits to military outposts more frequent. The people loved him more now, but differently. Not as a revolutionary, but as a shield, a man who had faced giants and stayed standing. And yet he never told them the full truth. Not about the jets, not about the whispers, not about how close they had come to ceasing to exist, because some truths are too loud. Instead, he stood on the rooftop of the palace on the eve of Independence Day. The city below was lit not by drones or searchlights, but by candles placed in windows by ordinary citizens who still remembered the blackouts. A silent tribute to a night they would never understand. The sky above was still, clear, and full of stars. Traore watched the horizon for a long time, waiting not for planes but for peace to finally feel real. Behind him, a child approached, the son of one of the soldiers stationed nearby. The boy handed him a paper airplane, clumsily folded. "For you," the child said, "in case they come back." Traore smiled. He took the paper craft in his hand, held it against the wind, and let it fly. No sound, no war, just a boy, a president, and the silence that saved a nation. The day the sky held its breath. How Ibrahim Traoré was saved by Putin and forced American fighter jets to retreat. In a world on the edge of conflict, alliances are forged not only through diplomacy, but through daring acts behind closed doors and skies filled with fire. What happened when Burkina Faso stood its ground, and the skies above Africa turned into a silent battlefield between East and West? This is the untold story of how President Ibrahim Traoré, betrayed by enemies from within and hunted by forces far beyond his borders, was saved at the last minute by an unexpected power, and how American fighter jets, prepared to strike, were forced into retreat. Stay tuned, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Captain Ibrahim Traoré for more explosive stories that challenge the official narrative. The sun over Ouagadougou burned like an omen. Its rays fell across the capital's rust-colored rooftops and sun-bleached avenues, where the rhythms of daily life moved with deceptive calm. Market stalls buzzed. Soldiers manned checkpoints with practiced nonchalance. Radio stations hummed in local dialects, looping songs of hope and sovereignty. But beneath the surface, something was shifting, and President Ibrahim Traoré could feel it. He had risen early that morning, as he often did, reviewing overnight briefings in a dimly lit war room beneath the presidential compound. The room had no windows, only maps, screens, and silence. What glowed brightest wasn't Burkina Faso's borders but the satellite feed above it. Unfamiliar flight paths, signals bouncing across layers of encrypted bandwidth. His advisors gave clipped answers. There had been no official air traffic reports filed for the northeastern zone.